Now let's take you further on the subject. We're joined by Haras Rafiq in London. He's a managing director of Quilliam, a think tank that focuses on counter-extremism, especially in regards to Islam. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Would you consider the suspects in the Paris attack homegrown terrorists, considering how well they seem to be trained on the video that's been circulating? And talk about this fear of the return of foreign fighters.
Well, certainly they're homegrown terrorists in so much that they are of Algerian origin, but certainly born within France and raised in France. And these were youngsters who, for a number of reasons, have converted to a political Islamist totalitarian version of the faith that I practice, which is Islam, that is practiced by billions, nearly 2 billion Muslims around the world in different manners, in different ways, in a totally peaceful manner as well. And these guys were converted to this particular totalitarian fascist ideology, coupled with a Salafi jihadi theology, to believe that the West is at war with Islam, that it's their duty to fight and struggle towards defeating people who they consider to be their enemies. And that includes other Muslims as well. And let's not forget that one of the people that was killed yesterday happened to be a Muslim as well. And it's quite ironic. They claim to have, the terrorists claimed that they acted in the name of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but they actually killed a police officer who was named after the Prophet. His name was Ahmed. So certainly these guys were homegrown and they converted to this theology and ideology. The way that they planned the attack, the way that they carried their weapons, the way that they grouped their bullets, and the way that they actually planned their escape routes, because these guys did not go there to actually die. In the past, we've seen jihadis, terrorists, in the West especially, carry out suicide bombings and carry out attacks with a view to achieving so-called martyrdom. These guys actually planned their escape routes and they were there to kill. So I think this is certainly a game changer and certainly something that we're seeing now that is different, certainly from the last 10 years. And it seems as if they've had some level of tactical and military training by the way they were carrying the weapons, as I said.
Haras, you know, it was a national day of mourning in France, but once all these vigils and remembrances are over, are you concerned about a new wave of anti-Islam sentiment across Europe? It's been something that's been well noted in Germany, the UK, where you are, and in France.
Well, actually, in the UK, it's not as bad. I mean, certainly I don't buy into this whole Islamophobia, so-called Islamophobia industry. It's not Islamophobia to critique any idea in Islam. The faith that I practice is an idea, and it's certainly in a liberal secular democracy, people have the right to accept it or not accept it, to critique it or whatever they want to do. There is a problem, however, with some people that may want to and are portraying anti-Muslim hatred, but that's a different matter. I don't see much blowback in the UK, and certainly with the people that I've spoken to in France over the last couple of days, other than a handful of isolated incidents, the civic society there, Muslims and non-Muslims, seem to have come together to condemn what's happened. And I think this is a good starting point, because it's not enough for Muslims and for anybody really to just purely get away with just condemning violence. The benchmark shouldn't be so low that we're just condemning violence. We have to accept that we as Muslims living in the West are living in a liberal secular democracy, are living in a society that actually allows us to have the freedom to practice the faith that we want to practice in the way that we want to practice it. And therefore it's the same freedoms, the same secularism, the liberal democracies, and the freedom to actually offend and the right to offend in some cases that actually allows us as Muslims to practice the faith that the way we want to, and affords us the right to live in the manner that we want to. So I think much more is needed to be done. And I think that out of something that is a tragedy, we may well see a civic society movement forming now of Muslims and non-Muslims coming together to deal with this Islamist-inspired extremism.
I want you to elaborate on something you touched on a moment ago. You used to be a member of the UK government task force countering extremism. How should governments adjust their strategy in countering attacks like the one we saw in Paris? You mentioned that terrorism is evolving. And does this make it much harder to fight now? Take us behind the scenes, if you will.
Terrorism, as we know it now, for Islamist terrorism certainly, is different to how it was 10 years ago. We're seeing 21st century jihad now in the way that social media is being used to market and recruit, in the way that groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda and others are starting to use corporate accounts almost at the end of the year. But I think the response has to be twofold. There has to be what I call the hard end of tackling this, and that has to be that once somebody has expressed sympathy, empathy and support for Islamist terrorism, there needs to be an intervention, either an arrest if the danger is clear and present, or if somebody is not yet at a level where they are dangerous or about to commit a crime, some sort of rehabilitation and de-radicalisation programme needs to take place, and some sort of intervention needs to happen. This is what didn't happen with these two brothers. But on the larger side, on the long-term struggle that we've got, we need to really confront the battle of ideas. We need to tackle the non-violent Islamist ideology that's been propagated without challenge over the last sort of 3 or 4 decades. It's only when we do this can we counter the narratives, counter the ideas, and build the resilience within the communities so that youngsters, when they are sort of attracted by charismatic recruiters, they've got the ability to push back. And this is a job for the whole of society. We have to make Islamism as unpopular as racism, fascism, and communism have been, certainly in the West.
Well, you mentioned rehabilitation, but how does that work? I mean, how do you rehabilitate someone who is on the verge or has been radicalized?
Well, certainly, the first stake in the ground is that not every single person can be de-radicalised and rehabilitated. Our organisation, Quilliam, has been founded by former extremists. There are people that have been jihadis in the past, and they have now, and over a period of time, completely disavowed the whole ideology and theology that drove them down this path in the first place. But we need to, in terms of de-radicalising, we need to tackle the intellectual, the social, the ideological, the emotional and spiritual aspects of the narratives and the conditions. And these can be perceived personal crises, these can be genuine personal crises that actually charismatic recruiters will use to actually take people down the pathways to radicalise individuals. That is happening in the UK. We have a very good programme initiative here called the Channel Programme that I was involved in, certainly when I was part of the government task force coming up with Prevent and Preventing Violent Extremism and in the early days, and certainly that's ongoing, and that's something that we do very well. What we don't do very well is the long-term challenging of ideas, and we need to do more of that.
As we speak, there are reports that up to 80,000 civil servants and officers have spread out across France trying to locate these two suspects, all for the 2 men that are on the run. What do you make of the response that's currently taking place, this manhunt that is ongoing?
I think that, as somebody said earlier on in the programme before this, excuse me, it seems that the French authorities are throwing everything that they can. It's of vital importance that they actually catch these, the people that are responsible for carrying out these attacks. And certainly we saw some more this morning as well. We're not saying that when we don't know yet whether the two were directly linked or not, but certainly another Muslim policeman and a non-Muslim person was killed in France, in Paris again this morning. The police and authorities in France need to show strength, and they need to show that they can't be defeated by a couple of people, first of all from a practical perspective, and secondly as a societal philosophical perspective, can't be defeated so that others can't be empowered and feeling a lot more braver, people who may be on the cusp of thinking about carrying out attacks like this, becoming more sort of ready to carry out these type of terrorist attacks in the future. So it's vital that these guys are caught, and it's not easy because of the actual the way and the tactics that these guys have used, but also the visa systems and the mechanism, the Schengen visa that we have in mainland Europe, where to travel in between the different countries, you don't have to show any documentation or passports or anything else at all. It's suspected that these guys haven't left France yet, but certainly the UK and other countries are on the lookout, and the borders there are now seriously looking out for these guys in case they try to escape from France.
All right, Haras Rafiq, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your perspective from London.